And this is a really important point that we need to really be careful of the rhetoric in this space. And there are numerous people that are pro Web3 that have a large equity and a stake in the space. And so they say things that, all the power is going to be shifted. And that's probably not going to happen. And history has shown that a number of times. So I think we'll get to Web 2.5. Mike?
What's up, Nil Dow? It is your boy, Michael Shamalis. In today's video, I have episode 2 of the weekly Nil Dow podcast. In today's episode, I bring on the show Jeremiah Owyang, who is a technology analyst based in Silicon Valley. He's also founded multiple technology research firms. Now, I bring on Jeremiah in today's episode because he brings a perspective that not a lot of us consider. He has his hands deep into Web3, and he's had a long career where he's experienced Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Because of his experience in his long career, I ask him a lot of questions like what actually is Web 3, what the migration from Web 2 to Web 3 looks like, and how does that compare to the migration of Web 1 to Web 2. We also talk about DAOs, the collaborative economy, the creator economy, and overall, he gives a perspective on decentralization that not a lot of us crypto maxis think about. I really enjoyed speaking with Jeremiah. I learned a lot, and I'm sure you will too. So ladies and gents, boys and girls, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Jeremiah, thank you so much for hopping on this podcast episode with me. For those of you who don't know, Jeremiah and I met through Twitter, and I've had the pleasure of honestly learning from you, watching a lot of your interviews and your talks, and I'm super excited for this podcast episode because I think not only myself, but our viewers will learn a perspective that's very different from what we see on YouTube and Twitter. So, before we get into the questions I have for you, Jeremiah, maybe give us a brief background of your, awesome career, from Web 1, Web 2 to Web 3, and kind of give us that breakdown.
Well, Mike, it is just a pleasure to spend time with you, and I've enjoyed learning from you, especially as we participate and we'll talk about the DAOs and in the NFT projects, so thank you. Yes, so I've been in tech for about 2 decades in Silicon Valley, and as an intern, I was at Web 1.0 startups. I was also at the forefront of Web 2.0, tracking the industry. In fact, we called it, something very different back then, and I was a technology analyst hired at Forrester Research. Then since then, I spun out. I've helped create a number of companies. I also tracked the collaborative sharing economy, which is peer-to-peer commerce, not too different than Web 2. And then here we are in Web 3. So I've seen a lot of trends. I've seen a lot of patterns. I know many of the entrepreneurs. I know many of the VCs. I know many of the tech influencers. So I feel like I have a blessed position where I can see the changes happening in the space. And Web 3 is definitely here today.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I've had the pleasure of kind of experiencing Web 2, the social media age, and then now there seems to be this transfer to Web 3, different business models being built and all that. Kind of, if you go on Google right now and search definition of Web 3, you really can't find a concrete one. But, based on some of the tweets you've tweeted and some of the talks you've done, I think you have a good grasp of what Web 3 is. So could you go ahead and maybe define what Web 3 is for us?
Sure. In a nutshell, it's self-sovereignty. But before we talk about that, let's back up. So Web 1.0 enabled anybody or any organization to create websites and that the whole world could read. However, you needed some technical capability. You needed to know HTML or CSS and RSS, and you needed to maintain a server, which might have been under your desk. Don't spill coffee under it. But if you did, you had tremendous power. And from there, we saw the birth of some e-commerce companies, search engine companies evolve. Then the next wave came, Web 2.0, where we could actually write on the internet. And this enabled not just read, but to write. And we saw the birth of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and beyond. In between that, we saw the collaborative or sharing economy or gig economy, which was kind of an offshoot of that, or peer-to-peer commerce. And now we are here at Web 3. Now, let's quickly talk about where Web 2 went wrong. And same thing with the sharing economy. Those entrepreneurs who were there to shake up the media industry or hotels or taxis, they themselves went to storm the gates of those castles, but they ended up becoming the kings and queens yet again. And they had the power, they had the control, they can make decisions, they can resell our data, and they generate and hold most of the wealth, 99% of the wealth. In fact, most of them are billionaires now, and the average user of any of those services has generated very little revenue. Sure, they benefit from consuming free services, but they are the level of wealth distribution is quite unequal. So here we are, Web 3.0. And again, the major summary of this movement is self-sovereignty. And that means that the individuals, don't call them users, they're really more like participants. The participants can actually own the internet that they are building. What exactly do they own? Mike, it could be they own the equity, they could own the actual content, they can own the contracts, but it also means they can govern. They can govern the organizations that they're part of. And it also means that they can have access to their identity and data. By the way, this isn't fully rolled out yet. We're still seeing elements of these things emerge. And then they can build. They can build and create metaverses. They can build and create NFTs and images. They can build organizations. They can build communities. They can build little economies, frankly. And of course, that leads to the last point is they can monetize. So here's the things with self-sovereignty, there's at least 6 attributes: ownership, their identity, which builds trust, they can govern, they can build, and then they can monetize. So that's where we are with Web3. Now that's the vision. And of course, these technologies are using decentralized and distributed technologies, primarily blockchain, that enable the individuals, the participants, the network to have that power away from central organizations. But it's not here in full fruition today. So that's the vision. All right, that was a long answer, but I wanted to be thorough to really make the point why self-sovereignty is the goal of Web 3.0.
And you know what, you lead up right to my next question. That was a beautiful summary, by the way. So, you know, we've seen the move from Web 1.0 to 2.0. And like you said, the heroes, you know, your Mark Zuckerberg's, your social media platform founders, when they, you know, I remember watching old clips of the Zucks, and, you know, he was very anti-establishment, anti-this, anti-that, and then they became the establishment. So we saw that migration from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0. Are you starting to see the same elements from when it comes to the migration from Web 2.0 to 3.0, or do you think this time it could be different? Like, do we see similarities, or like what's going on from your perspective?
And this is a really important point that we need to really be careful of the rhetoric in this space. And there are numerous people that are pro Web3 that have a large equity and a stake in the space. And so they say things that, you know, all the power is going to be shifted. And that's probably not going to happen. And history has shown that a number of times. So I think we'll get to Web 2.5. Mike, where we already see centralized institutions in many ways, right? We see Coinbase is literally becoming a bank in many ways, right? And you have the KYC and they have control. OpenSea has 97%, I believe, of all NFT transactions, and they can, you know, change the algorithms, or they can turn accounts on and off. They can, you know, make NFT projects visible or not. They know who's going to be featured before it's on the homepage, right? They have a tremendous amount of control. I mean, technically, even some of the wallets, you could say, have dominant ecosystem adoption as well. And, you know, so unfortunately, we will see this pattern where whoever provides the best user experience, the mainstream users will go there. As a result, they will turn into the 1%ers. I've seen this pattern so many times.
Yeah, you know, I was sort of oblivious to the ethos of decentralization. You know, I've lived in a third world country a good chunk of my life, and I've seen what a government that has complete control over the financial system, all those systems, can do to a people. So, you know, you talk about decentralization, DeFi, it's very, very appealing. But when we talk about reality, you know, I don't mean to name call, but you look at a project like Solana, and then I don't know if you saw the podcast, but there was a podcast where 3 VCs were essentially laughing that they got the earliest allocation and now they're dumping on people, right? And it I'm
Yikes.
not anti, yeah, it's very sad. And I'm not anti centralization because, like you said, you mentioned in one of your talks, most people won't care for decentralization. Most people, like I've tried to get cousins, family members to, try to onboard them on crypto. Just explaining to them how MetaMask works is such a pain, right?
Yes.
To the transaction fees and stuff. So I do 100% believe there is a space for centralized entities because you sign up with Coinbase, just a few clicks, you've set out auto buy on Ethereum for weeks to come, right? So I'm very pro, centralized entities creating products for people that are very, very simple. My auntie, my mom is just not going to set up a MetaMask. But talking about centralized entities and people developing new projects on Web3, are you starting to see a shift in talent from Web2 to Web3, or is it still early? And when it comes to that shift, what's the ethos like in maybe Silicon Valley or amongst Web2 folks? What do they think of Web3? Like, what's going on amongst founders and all that stuff?
Just to pick up on your last point before I address this great question, I've done research numerous times, and we've surveyed people on Web2 and the sharing economy. And over, the things they value the most, Mike, is convenience and value. So if it's convenient and cheap, that's where they're going to go. And that's why people have stuck with Facebook over the years, or why people have used their bank or their credit card. It's because it's just easy and they're familiar with it. So what we have, definitely tension when it comes to onboarding people to these new clunky systems that are not providing a great participant experience. So to answer your question, I am definitely seeing the talent shift from Web 2 to Web 3. Numerous people are leaving those other companies that I mentioned, and they're joining Web 3 projects. And some of these Web 2 companies are struggling to keep the talent, so they do press releases like, they are saying we're going to do crypto at Google or Reddit or Facebook. I would say Twitter is the most likely a player in the space to really bridge and become a Web 2.5 company, especially with Jack and Block, aka Square, that's going to integrate into Twitter. But for the other social networks, I think they're either going to fall behind or they're going to leapfrog ahead and play into the metaverse, which might be a better capability for them rather than cryptocurrency. So I am definitely seeing the talent shifting to the Web3 companies, and it makes sense too. Because you could go to a tech company, a traditional large tech company, Mike, and you could make, let's just say $300,000 salary, which is an amazing salary, right? But the payout in the equity would take 3 to 4 years, and then there's a cliff in getting that equity. Or you could go to a crypto company and launch a coin and an NFT project and generate $5 million in a week. What are you going to do? And if that didn't work, do it again. And if that didn't work, do it again, do it again, do it again. And plus the VC money is going into the Web3 space. The amount of funding throwing into the space is incredible, right? So it's very easy to get funding. So the Web 2.0 companies are going to struggle to keep talent.
I see. And what is the consensus like among Web 2 people building in Web 2? Are they excited about Web 3? Are they kind of like what's Silicon Valley saying of Web 3? Is there hatred towards it? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I'd say it's split into thirds. So I have a number of friends. We all grew up together in Web 2, and we are around the same generation, plus or minus, several years. And many of them now are in executive roles at Web 2 companies, like the big telecommunications companies, social networks, search companies, enterprise software. And there's no reason for them to want to embrace what's new. They're in a great position. So I'd say around a third of my contacts they're poo-pooing on Web3. And I'll tell you why in just a sec. And then a third of them are like, let's go, because I'm here in tech because I want to build something new. I might be wealthy, but I just want to build new. I want to be on the front. They're excited about innovation. And there's a third like, don't care. Let's see what happens. I'll go where the energy goes. So let's back up to the first group who are anti-Web 3.0. And the things they tell me are very interesting, Mike. And we actually need to contemplate this and think about this. They say to me, Jeremiah, I don't know why you're on this trend. The vision of the internet was for it to be open and free to all. And you're trying to tokenize everything and make everything being coin gated or NFT gated, or those that get in first win. And whoever gets to stake those coins is going to be wealthier than the next person and have more governance and voting ability. It's just a giant pyramid. I understand the technology. I understand the blockchain. I understand like what happened and what went wrong, but this is not going to solve what went wrong in Web 2. So that's what their argument is, Mike.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? A part of that is true, right? Like when you look at, popular NFT projects, like for example, Bored Ape, Yacht Club. If you did not get early, majority of people have been priced out, and you're starting to kind of see these groups form that are not inclusive, but like almost like have their own club that you can't get into. But I think this is just a pro and con situation of adding economies to the internet, right? Because what are most communities in the Web3 space that are token gated? Essentially an economy, right?
Yeah.
So the question now becomes, do we have to, I think this is an economist game. Do we have to think of ways where, economies can be built in a community that allows onboarding seamlessly, right? Because the problem with Web 2 is, yes, it's free for everybody, but come on, look how much data is being milked out of every user that ends up being sold for billions of dollars, right? Like I get Facebook is free, Instagram is free, but is it really free if I'm the product? You know what I mean?
It's technically trillions, by the way.
You know what I mean?
They add dollars. Yeah.
So, and this is kind of, because I have a couple of Web2 friends as well, and they're extreme haters. And one of the reasons is they are in high positions. So I get it. You know what I mean? You live a comfortable life. Your salary is amazing. You don't want that taken away from you. But this notion that Web3 is, it's token gated. If you're not early, people can't get in. Well, that is a problem. Going back to the Web 2 state, in my opinion, is not the solution, right? So I think this is an economist game. I think about this all the time. For example, in NFTs, I'm seeing a shift where a lot of projects are starting to do free mints on layer 2s. So that way, now the competition is more about getting early. It isn't about money. But even then, how if someone got in late? What do we do there? So it's definitely interesting conversations to have. But I do have a question.
And also,
go ahead.
I just want to build off that. And then we're seeing airdrops for participation in other platforms. For example, Looks Rare is a competitor to OpenSea, the NFT marketplace. And they allow anybody who's used OpenSea, you connect your wallet and you can see the transactions. Then you can claim the Looks token, which is a way to onboard people that were in these centralized platforms. And of course, we saw SOS before that. So I can imagine, Mike, we will see a DAO form that does an airdrop to users of Facebook and Google and Twitter and LinkedIn and Uber and Airbnb and Spotify. I might just go on and on and on, right? So I think that's how we onboard people, is reward them for their past participation.
Yeah, and Luxor is a perfect example because they went from literally a platform that nobody knew about to now are building some serious features. And I've actually started to search LooksRare every time OpenSea's down. So it's very interesting. Like this is an economist game in a sense where how do we create an inclusive environment where people can take part? I think the added financialization, I'm not even sure if that's a word, of the internet really does create an economy that could change people's lives. But speaking of corporations, this is I've enjoyed your article where you're tracking the list of companies that have launched NFT projects. And, one of the big mistakes a lot of companies during Web 1, your IBMs or, any big conglomerate at that time, they never really made that shift to Web 2. They never took social media seriously. And a lot of companies got left behind that didn't innovate at least. And now you're starting to see companies race towards the NFT sector, Marvel, Dolce & Gabbana, and Pepsi. What are these companies looking to accomplish? Are they, learning from the mistake that some companies did and migrate over to Web 2? Or is this experimentation? Because I sit and I think, and I'm like, why does Pepsi need to launch an NFT collection? So, what's going on in the minds of these companies when they launch these things?
Gotcha. Great question. So I do track the brands in the space. I work with corporates in addition to startups because that's the whole part of the ecosystem. And they too want to stay relevant. And they have digital teams, they have innovation teams. And a number of these companies already have Web3 teams in place, like Adidas. they actually have a Web 3.0 team or a metaverse team that already exists. And some of the toy companies have gaming divisions now, digital gaming. So let's just back up. Where are we right now, Mike? We're in a pandemic where people are at home, and the way they are connecting to each other and to brands is all through the screens. Secondly, supply chain for physical products has been hammered, and it's harder to get products or even food, and certainly anything with a computer chip. So these brands have realized that they need to figure out how to engage their customers through digital. And right now, people are connecting many times in Web3 just using NFTs. The profile photos end up becoming a tribal banner where people are finding their community. It's an example of people finding their own tribe and connecting. Secondly, the metaverse is a wonderful place for interaction. And as many people know, the assets in the metaverse will be sold as NFTs on blockchain. So these are all interconnected. So we've seen a race. We've seen a race of these big brands. And I don't know, is there 100 examples just in the last year? It's quite a bit. Most of them are B2C brands for sure. Consumer packaged goods, beverage, alcohol, and they either are offering their own NFT that people can purchase. Some of them are, just collectible items. Some of them are digital clones that tie to a physical example, like wine bottles, and you can own the wine bottle when you purchase the NFT. So it's a form of provenance and certification. Another example could be an engageable one. The Matrix one, you can actually red pill or blue pill the avatar, and then it'll turn into a very cool Neo Trinity looking one or a boring Gap model. Depends which one you want. And so that's a composable NFT. And then other brands are partnering with artists and sponsoring them. Nivea, the skincare company, hired and partnered with artists to create unique art. So there's many ways that brands are doing this. Now, I'd say 90% of these are flops. They're not interesting. They're not exciting. It's not doing well. But there's a couple examples where the Bored Apes, they partnered with Adidas. Also, Arizona Iced Tea partnered and purchased a Bored Ape. We saw Visa buy a CryptoPunk, where they're engaging with communities where they already exist. So that's another strategy that can sometimes yield things. I think the hot one today is like Gucci and Superplastic. I think that one is like 9 ETH already this morning, which is insane. Amount that's $27,000 almost, or $20,000. So quite a few examples, and I think the Super Bowl, which is in about 2 weeks, we're going to see quite a few crypto and NFT integrations happen, just like we saw social media integrate with Super Bowl ads 2 weeks ago. So it's very exciting to see. I realize though that the Web3 purists, the Web3 maxis, hate the fact that big brands are in the space, but it's important to remember this is how you get the mainstream to come on board. Sure, Matt Damon is doing his bit with crypto.com, but when brands come like Disney and Marvel that people love and trust, that will help to really crypto people much faster.
No, I agree. There is definitely a sense of hatred amongst Web3 purists and corporations do it. And I get the premise. One of the things I think I'm totally against is, and we've seen this a couple of times when corporations tend to do their homework. Like you say, they hire whole divisions, they hire people. Corporations don't really make the mistake of not knowing what they're doing. But what I've seen is, and I think a lot of Web3 maxis are mad about this, and I agree with them, is your influencers, right? We're seeing a large influx of influencers come in and make a lot of money. And there are influencers that care. Like, for example, Gary Vee, when he did his VFriends collection, that was probably one of the most I enjoyed an influencer release a collection, just because you saw him do his homework. You saw him contribute to the community. So, with the Web3 purist mind, the Web3 maxi mind coming in comes Facebook, the Trap King, Mr. Zuckerberg, now Meta, and then you have Microsoft also entering the scene. Clearly, they want to build their own metaverse. How successful do you think they'll be with the ethos of crypto being decentralization and this sort of stigmatization towards big corporations? Like, what do you think? Do you think the average user will care? Or is it going to be the same thing that we've seen from Web 1 to Web 2, where the bigger company with the most money that makes it the most seamless wins?
Unfortunately, I think it's the mainstream users will go where there's convenience and it's cheapest. And so they will go with whatever experience they're probably used to, and they will go with somebody who doesn't charge them a lot of fees. And I think that goes against what's happening in Web3 with the innovators. Of course, innovators will continue to build and refine and improve. We already see that Solana is fast. There are fewer low fees. That is an example where people can build. But I do think that we will see this fake chain emerge from Web 2. I just made that term up. Like a fake chain would be like a side chain on Facebook that looks kind of like crypto, but it's not, and everything is it's all custodial in your Facebook profile. I think they will do something in that way that looks safer, and part of that is to appease the regulators who are going to have a lot of questions on that. And I think the mainstream will adopt those big brands that do that: Facebook, Google, Microsoft, but not all consumers will go there. So we did a study one time, Mike. We asked consumers, and this was right when Facebook Beacon came out, which was perhaps their first big mistake when it came to privacy with users on the newsfeed. And we polled consumers and we said, "Are you concerned, Mike, about internet security and safety when it comes to social networks?" And through the roofs, the respondents were like, "Oh yeah, very concerned. Absolutely. Very, very, that's such a high priority." Then we asked them, "Do you look or adjust your security or permission settings in your social networks?" And the response rate was extremely low, single digit percentages. So that kind of tells you the mindset of the average person, that they're, and let's just be clear, it's not their fault. Often you have to opt out. And I don't read the terms of service from Facebook. I don't have 8 hours and a lawyer I can hire to really understand what's being written. So it's not in our favor. But my point is that the mainstream user is just too busy, or just doesn't care, or is time sensitive or price sensitive. So it's the message to the Web3 community is we have to make things very easy and very cheap for them to transact, or everything will go back to the Web 2 companies, just like with the sharing economy. I've seen this trend before.
What's funny? I've often thought, what if Facebook charged a subscription service? Like they promised, we won't track anything, we won't track your profile, just pay $10 a month. And I'm like, I wonder what the drop-off rate would be. Because a lot of people seem to care, but not enough if it's inconvenient. And I think the social media platforms understand that, and they make it very inconvenient. Because even to opt out, it's not a one-click solution. Like you have to probably go to your settings, turn some, you probably have to go Google a tutorial. So it's very, very interesting. But, you did a talk in 2016, and this is one of the most important questions I wanted to ask. And you showed a change in business model, right? How companies were kind of going from this industrial revolution mindset to this collaborative economy, right? The sharing economy that we talked about. And you mentioned a lot of flaws in the sharing economy, earlier on. Is Web3 the next phase in the collaborative economy, or is it the completion of the collaborative economy? Like, is it an advancement? Like, where do we stand on that scale of where we are in the collaborative economy with Web3?
Thanks. And thank you for going back to look at the prior work that I did. And the collaborative economy was peer-to-peer commerce, right? So the shared cars, shared homes, shared space, shared time. In a way, crowdfunding and early forms of crypto were part of that market. And it became centralized over time. And so here we are again. I'm seeing the same patterns. I think Web3 will be an advancement towards self-sovereignty of participants and internet communities, but it's not going to solve it again. There's just so much. I mean, the first indicator, right, Mike, is where's the source of funding? So if the source of funding is primarily from the participants, then we have a greater opportunity for individual self-sovereignty. But if a majority of the funding has come from the one percenters, I don't see how that's going to decouple the power structure at all.
And I've seen this in another talk where in a tweet actually where you had issue with the word DeFi, right? Because DeFi is decentralized finance, but you talked about, and I didn't know this. I didn't know there were a lot of these protocols are actually either backed by venture capital firms or they're even backed by Wall Street people. So, like, tell me, like, what is it that the average DeFi user doesn't know that you've come to see through conversation and people you know?
Sure. Most of the unicorns, which is $1 billion project in Web3 space, most, not all, are backed by the one percenters. The VCs own a majority stake, and and I live near them. I'm friends with them. I know them. I'm an LP, by the way, in some funds. So I got my fingers in all parts of the ecosystem, as well as with the upstarts and the activists and the startups as well. And so typically, what happens is the VCs need to see a return in 5 to 10 years because they have to return money back to their customers, which are called the limited partners. That's the people who gave them the money. So they're going to require some of the monetization to happen. And so that creates some interesting things. I mean, this is what happened to Uber and Airbnb. These companies needed to go public or to sell or partner. And so it forces monetization, often at the risk of the user and the participant experience. So that is already what's happened. Now, of course, there are some large DAOs that tend to be user owned or driven just by staking or liquidity pools. However, the VCs also and investors, they are also acquiring large amounts of coins as well. Just take MicroStrategy, and he is certainly a Bitcoin maxi, but they have 1% of all available Bitcoins. That's a tremendous amount. 1%.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
wow.
It's incredible amount. Right. I mean, and I understand the vision and all the things that Mr. Saylor says, but that is the same power dynamics that we see elsewhere. So that's the second thing. And we have to also think about why should companies be VC backed? And I do want to share why they do this. Let's imagine there's 5 companies making wallets, or 5 companies making DEXs, or 5 companies making NFT exchanges. Just one of them that raises 100 million with a valuation of $1 billion. The other ones go, we're going to fall behind. They're going to hire the best talent. They're going to do the best marketing. They're going to have the most money for ads. They're going to get the best user experience designers. They're going to have the best support teams, and they're going to hire enough people to lobby the regulators in DC. If we don't take this money in advance, we will fall behind and we'll lose anyways. And the VCs come around to player number 2, 3, 4, 5, say, listen, don't fall behind. We're going to back you. We're going to fund you. And that's how this game has happened. I saw this happen with the quote hippie sharing economy. It was very hippie in the early days. By the way, Web 2 was extremely hippie in the very early days as well. And I see a lot of those same things. These patterns repeat over and over and over. So I hate to be the raining on the parade, but I want to be the holder of the truth and make people understand that we probably won't get to Web 3 fully. Web 2.5 is still a big advancement.
Completely agree. But like, so what does the right mix feel like, right? Because like you said, in the example that you gave, there's 5 companies. If one company gets $100 million in funding, those 4 are toast, right? Doesn't matter how smart, the other 4 could be. That financial advantage to hire the best talent, to invest in the best marketing, even the lobbying perspective, which I never really thought of, that, a company would have some money allocated for that. So what does the right, Web 2.5 is a very interesting term, by the way. What does the right mix feel like? Do these projects, because there are some projects that adopt the no VC ethos, but there are also projects that become very super successful with a VC. So what do you think is a right mix, or can that never be achieved?
I think it depends on the market segment. Like, I love the work that you're doing within the Nil DAO and the N project. To me, that is the front edge of innovation. And that's why I have it, one of the N NFTs. I love to see and participate and be part of that. That is truly community driven. But is it for the mainstream, my auntie or my uncle? I don't know if they'll understand, or I don't know if they'll understand, like, they have to participate and be active and the benefits that come with that. So I think it depends on which market segment and who we're talking about. So But for the mainstream, let's imagine it's a bell-shaped curve. I'm waving my hands in the air right now. So the front part of the curve will likely be more like Web 3.0, where it's community owned, community governed, and community rewards. Community, community, community. You could say participant. But the mainstream will have a mixture. The greatest percent, which was probably 2/3 of the market, there'll be a mixture of this where brands and the creatives can win at the same time. Some of the users will be able to govern and own. There'll be this in-between state. And then the last portion, the tailing edge of that bell-shaped curve, they will just stick with Web 2.0 and Amazon and Google. There's no reason for them to shift over because of wherever they are in their life curve.
Interesting, interesting. And we talk about community. You did this talk, I think it was with a bunch of business execs, and you essentially told them community shouldn't be an afterthought, but a forethought. And you've said that quite a lot in a few of your interviews. Is that what DAOs have become? Is that phrase, that sentence, in completion, what a DAO is? Like, what are your, because we're, me working in Nil DAO, and I've participated in other DAOs as well. You really see a difference between, there are some DAOs that, say they're a DAO for the sake of marketing purposes, because, instantly when you put the word DAO, it's very exciting. But then there are actual DAOs, and I might be biased, but, working with Nil DAO, I've started to really see the pros of, how a DAO works, but also being part of Web 2, there are some, there are some negatives to it, right? Especially when it comes to speed and stuff. So,
Right.
when you were telling companies, these business execs, community shouldn't be an afterthought, but a forethought. Is that what a DAO looks like? Is that what a DAO
Yes.
is?
Absolutely, a DAO is that, and the reason why companies are product obsessed, but to be customer obsessed means to put the community first. And typically, when big companies think of community, they think of it as customer care, like customer support, like throw the customers into that online forum so they can answer each other's questions about our products because we don't want to help them because it costs us money. Literally, customer care is a cost center in companies versus a DAO. The community is not a quote cost center. That's not even a term that we even use, right? The community is the ethos, is the engine of innovation. It's the people who are creating. It's the people who are governing and deciding and also participating. And even in the Nil DAO, if you bring in an artist, you can be rewarded for bringing out the artist. You're doing the sales, you're doing the advocacy. In all of the phases, let's just take the product life cycle from the idea to the marketing to the sales to the product innovation to the product fulfillment to the product support to advocacy. And that could be a loop, by the way. The community in a DAO is doing all of those aspects. And traditionally, in a company, they would only do that their employees. But in a community like a DAO, everybody can play to their strengths and participate in parts of those processes or multiple parts of those processes. So it is, in a way, what I call a digital cooperative, like a owners or a workers cooperative, which is not a new term. That's a tribal behavior, right? Going back to the most primitive cultures, whether it's in China, Africa, or Native Americans, the tribal, everybody would participate in order to eat together. Everybody would hunt or gather or farm. And now we're seeing those behaviors happen again. Somehow along the way, Mike, in the Industrial Revolution, the individuals got pigeonholed into one single task. For example, one person was required to stamp the leather in this way. That's the only job they did. The next person would dye the leather, right? And that's the only thing they would do. But now we're going back to a very different thing where we can participate in multiple roles and how we want in a collective. And it's a very different thing than the traditional Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I definitely do think it's very interesting. And when DAOs launch, and this is when being a decentralized maxi can be very dangerous. Like, I think in the very beginning, when a DAO launches, there should be that core team that handles a lot of things quickly, right? Because especially in a competitive space like in the crypto market, we are, a competitor can come and destroy you very, very quickly, very, very easily. Mm-hmm. But, something I've experienced with Nil DAO is as we became more and more decentralized, the community IQ almost started to grow together. where people knew where to contribute, how to contribute. And what I love about this is it's almost starting to create maybe a community capitalism, in a sense where there isn't a hierarchical structure in a sense, but people know their strengths, know their weaknesses, and want the best for the DAO because of the financial incentive, right? And this is where I have a disagreement with Web2 people. I don't care if Facebook succeeds, realistically, if Twitter succeeds. I just don't, right? I am not incentivized through ownership, through any monetary figure, right? So I think DAOs will be super, super huge in 2022. And I guess I want to end off with this question. This is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you is, what does Web3 look like 5 years from now?
Oh man, I don't even know what I'm going to have for lunch, Michael. That is such a hard question. And I think about how my forecasts were wrong in the past. Often I almost always get the timelines incorrect, where things happen faster than I thought it would. And a couple of times I was incorrect on the outcome, where I thought a more liberal outcome would happen, where the participants had a more upside, but instead it became centralized. So that's why you hear a little bit of that jadedness out of me now, is because I listened to the rhetoric too much in some of the prior movements. So I think it's going to be Web 2.5, where we will see large dominant players that are crypto native emerge. We already see elements of that now. We will also see the traditional tech companies have tentacles into Web3. Maybe they launch their own social token, or they fund DAOs, or they partner with DAOs. I can imagine, for example, let's just take, Adobe. Adobe should sponsor Nil DAO because it gets them connected to digital artists. Like, I could imagine them buying tokens. Would Nil DAO like that? I think it would result in a long discussion, and there might be parameters, and there might be a cap. I see there's this mixture between that, and eventually, of course, they'd want to have their Behance product be connected to Nil DAO. Like, I can imagine that happening, right? Where both parties could grow. So I think that's kind of where the traditional society will happen. I definitely think that just taking the United States government and the regulators, they now recognize there's strength and value here. But if it goes unchecked, it'll go awry. But if they shut it down, they're going to lose economic value. So they're trying to figure that out and how to integrate this, just as they had to do with Web 2.0 and .com as well. So I think it'll be regulated. I do think that we will see in 5 years that, and I realize this upsets people, but I think KYC will be, you'll have to be doxxed. Your identity will have to be known in order to bridge out just about everywhere. So I think pseudonyms and certainly being anonymous will be very difficult to do in 5 years in Web3. I think it's going to be, most people will have to be doxxed. So there's just a few things there, Mike.
Listen, I agree with everything you say. And the reason why I asked that is your talks on the collaborative economy, first of all, were early on, because after I watched your video, I started to get a lot of recommended videos, and those were usually dated in 2018, 2019. So I definitely wanted to hear your thoughts.
That's funny.
Yeah, but the interesting thing here is, at the end of the day, like you said, people want simplicity and ease of access, right? And they want it to be cheap, and whoever can achieve that first and the best way wins, right? And I think that's the advantage a lot of big platforms have. I think the focus, and this is one of the things we start to focus on in Nil DAO, is we also have to, I hate the word customer. I rather participants, like you said.
Participants. Yes.
Yeah. How do we make the participant life cycle as smooth as possible, right? For example, when you go on OpenSea and a very hyped project drops, it takes about 5 clicks to purchase. And if someone has a bot or some sort of extension that gives them an advantage, I've basically lost, right? So it's definitely a tug and pull from how decentralized is a project versus how simple it is. And I think whoever can achieve that middle ground, even if they have their leanings, will succeed. But other than that, Jeremiah, I don't have any other questions. I've enjoyed our conversation. I do, though, want to ask you, Is there anything you want to share? Any thoughts? I will definitely link your Twitter down below. I think Jeremiah is someone who is super important to follow. It gives you a different perspective in the crypto space, especially if you're a DeFi decentralized maxi. It's super important to come back to earth sometimes. But yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add or say, Jeremiah?
No, and I appreciate people listening. I would enjoy to hear your comments, even if you disagree on Twitter. I'm happy to engage with you, and we can chat about it further.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And next week, I will see you with another awesome podcast episode. Take care, everybody.